Welcome to Expanding Your Toolbox, Intro to Webex Remote Simultaneous Interpreting. This is a joint effort of us, TEA Language Solutions. I'm the E, Tamber Hilton is the T, Amy Benavides is the A, and the University of Arizona National Center for Interpretation. So thank you to them for hosting us. And we are streaming on their page right now. Again, I want to remind everybody as you come in, please mute your microphone and make sure that your camera is off. And so who are we? For those of you who don't know us, who did not get a shout out as we were beginning here, Amy Benavides is a federally certified interpreter out of Fresno, California. Outside of court, she likes to do agricultural interpreting and translation, and specifically technology related, lately has been doing some very sophisticated technological maneuvers with virtual focus groups, which we can get into. It's tangential to this, but if there's time or if anybody is interested, maybe in the Q&A. Tamber Hilton is federally certified interpreter, and you see JD next to her name. As of this time next week, she will be Tamber Hilton Esquire. She has passed the bar and will be sworn in on Tuesday. Based in Washington, D.C. and Tucson, also interprets in immigration and is a consultant and soon to be an attorney practicing in immigration. And I, su servidor, I am Ernest Nino Murcia, based in Des Moines, Iowa, coming from the Midwest, federally certified interpreter. And outside of court, my little sideline that I developed in the pandemic was interpreting for press conferences and televised debates. And that also spun into interpreting some soccer commentary, play-by-play. So it's a mixed bag with us, but the common thread between us is our love of remote simultaneous interpreting, specifically Webex, which we will be discussing with you all tonight. And so who are we as a unit, not as individuals? We are TEA Language Solutions. We are all interpreters, but we all offer training and consulting, both for service providers and for other interpreters, with regards to remote events and remote interpreting. And so that's what we have been doing. This session tonight is actually a companion piece to a session that we did about Zoom simultaneous interpreting back in May of 2020. And since then, it's been a long road, and we are technicians and consultants for Zoom simultaneous events. We are now starting to do hybrid in-person virtual events, and Webex is the new frontier that we have gotten a little bit down the road with and are excited to share our thoughts with you on. And so who is this presentation for? This would be useful for anybody who is putting together an event. So if you're in the market for a platform to use remote interpreting for an event, for language service providers who provide interpreters for remote events, for consultant interpreters. And what we mean by that is an interpreter, but not just an interpreter that shows up, goes in the virtual booth and interprets. An interpreter where the client comes to you and says, we want to do this remotely. What do you think? Are we using Zoom? Are we using Kudo? That's what we mean by consultant interpreter, which is a value-added service, incidentally. Or if you want to reach out to a client proactively and say, hey, I've noticed you've done some meetings on Webex and we've been having to interpret over the phone to do simultaneous. Did you know that they now have a simultaneous function? So basically using this to pitch your clients and grow your book of business through this. And also just interpreters who are like us, geeks and enjoy playing with technology, or want to future-proof their skill set and be ready to interpret on Webex, so that if you get a call tomorrow from a client or an agency that says this event is on Webex simultaneous, are you up to it? You would be able to answer yes and move forward with it. So just some housekeeping before we really get into the meat of the presentation. You are all muted. Some of you by choice, some of you by our will, and we will remain so until the Q&A, and then we ask that everybody have their cameras off. We have a live stream going right now through Facebook, and if one of my colleagues can please copy that link into the chat, you can share that with anybody that would potentially want to participate. The recording of this session will live on that Facebook at least for a little bit. And so we are going to be demonstrating some features more than once in different ways to make sure that the folks in this WebEx room and the folks in the stream are able to get a full view of what WebEx has to offer. That's a fun sort of challenge for us, is creating something that's going to be engaging for the people in this room and also for people who are streaming and don't have access to all the buttons in the WebEx interface. And for those of you who are on the stream, shout out, hello, greetings in Facebook land. We recommend that you expand the size of your viewing window to full screen so that you can see everything that's going on. And feel free to ask any questions or comments. I will be the comment chat wrangler, so better chance of getting engagement from me once I'm done talking, which will happen shortly. And there will be comments also in the chat. So let's establish some common vocabulary just so everybody is on the same page. RSI, when we use the word RSI, the acronym, we mean remote simultaneous interpreting. So you're interpreting simultaneously, but you are not physically present either with your audience or with the speaker. This is specific WebEx terminology. For those of you who did conferences before the pandemic and who are used to doing this in real life world, what is referred to floor audio refers to basically what is being said in that meeting by everyone other than the interpreters. So if you were sitting there, had no interpretation, what would you hear? That is referred to as floor audio, and specifically in WebEx, within the terminology of the platform, floor audio is referred to as original audio. This is relevant because we're going to come back to this when you demo listening for yourselves. Relay interpreting would refer to, if I'm in a meeting and I interpret Spanish and English, somebody on the floor is speaking Chinese, I can't take Chinese to Spanish, and so I have to, in conjunction, like a relay race, conjunction with the Chinese booth, listen to their English, that becomes my input, and I take that into Spanish. That's what we are referring to. Next, when we refer to inputs for an interpreter, we're referring to what you are hearing, what you have coming in. And I'm sorry that because of my virtual background, when I gesticulate like that, it kind of looks like you're having a hallucination, so I'm going to stop. It's a bad habit of mine when I'm doing witness testimony also, so it's for the better. And then output would be your microphone, what you are producing, what you are putting into that meeting through your microphone. And so I wanted to ground this discussion in a big picture view of the landscape of remote simultaneous interpreting and highlight that there are different platforms and there are different capabilities. And so on the very far end of this spectrum, we have conventional static platforms that don't have a simultaneous function, asterisk, they don't have a built-in simultaneous function. You can duct tape MacGyver your way into simultaneous with these if you have a separate phone call going or have a second computer, have a second Teams meeting, whatever. But for our purposes, these are static platforms that you could use to call your grandma for Christmas. Now, the midpoint here is Zoom, which if you've done simultaneous interpreting, I would suspect the vast majority of you have done it in Zoom. Zoom is a midpoint. Zoom is a conventional video platform with a basic simultaneous function attached to it. And so you can do simultaneous on it. It has some limitations. You can also do conventional video chat on it. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have the fancy end of the lot, if we were talking about cars. We have the platforms that are created by interpreters. They are for interpreters. You wouldn't, unless you want to blow a bunch of money, you wouldn't use Kudo or Interactio to talk to your grandma for Christmas. These exist for multilingual events, and they have full service, fully equipped interfaces for doing interpretation and listening. And you pay a steep price for that. And WebEx now is in that end of things. And we'll be discussing this in greater detail because on paper, it has those high-end features with some drawbacks, which we'll be discussing here at length. And so because the frame of reference for a lot of people is Zoom, I wanted to specifically draw a contrast between Zoom's interface and WebEx's interface. So any of you who have worked on Zoom are familiar with what we refer to as the toggle this button that appears when you're set as interpreter that lets you control what audio channel your output is going into. The listeners that select this channel will hear you either with the speaker or just by yourself. Okay. And now here is our Webex interpreting interface. And so you can see the similarities. Control of your output channel, control of your output channel between Zoom and Webex. Those are the similarities. And as we would say in Spanish, hasta ahí llegamos. That is as far as the similarities go. Now, to really look at what differentiates Cisco Webex from Zoom, we can look further down this image and see that there is a handover button that allows you to touch this button, and then your partner gets a notification saying your partner wants to hand you the mic. And so there is a little bit of structure to trading off on the microphone. There is a audio channel selection. So you can choose whether you hear audio from your partner, and you can choose how you mix that proportionally with the floor. And so if you want to hear only your partner, you slide the little dot all the way to the end of this continuum. If you want to hear a 50-50 mix, you would put it in the middle. And you do this on a single device without having to mess with connecting your phone or connecting a second computer and all of these contortions that we have to go through to do these things in Zoom. And so for these functions, for handing over the microphone, for taking relay, for listening to your partner, Webex has these lovely buttons on their interface, and Zoom gives us duct tape. And that's not to say Zoom is not a great platform. Zoom is a lovely platform that we, to some degree, make our living on and have gotten very used to the duct tape and are somewhat duct tape masters, I guess. People pay us to manage their duct tape. But it is a fact that is, if you want to hand over on Zoom, you and your partner are going to make up a system. If you want to do relay or listen to your partner on Zoom, you're connecting a second device to that meeting, or connecting from a browser on the same device, but that's harder. And so this gives you an idea of what we're looking at. And again, I don't want to paint a utopian picture of Webex, because we are going to talk at length about the issues and the inconveniences that we have found in Webex. But this is the initial appeal. And now I will shut down my share and we will get right to it. Tamber will start by sharing differences and similarities between the interfaces of Zoom and Webex apart from simultaneous interpreting. And so over to you, Tamber Hilton, Almost Esquire.
Thanks so much, Ernest. So now you should be seeing my screen. And I'm going to put us on grid view just so that's a little bit, yeah, that's better than just one of us large. Okay, so what I wanted to do with this part here, and sorry, I'm kind of looking over my shoulder because I'm also running the stream, so I'm just making sure everything looks okay over there. And so what I wanted to do here is, because I know that many of us are really used to working in Zoom or other platforms. And so by sharing this screen and kind of walking you guys through Webex controls, I wanted to give you the opportunity to see some of the things that are different about Webex. Some of the things that are the same are that, first of all, we have at the bottom of our screen here, we have our mute unmute button, we have stop video, share, which I'll show you right now is just a teeny bit different from in Zoom. This has nothing to do with interpretation. I'm really just kind of orienting you to Webex in general. So the share here, it looks very similar. It separates in kind of a nice way the sharing your full entire screen from sharing discrete apps. So that's helpful. It's a little tricky to share audio and video in Webex. You actually have to click this, which is a little not intuitive. In Zoom, it's actually labeled share computer audio, but you just have to know that this little speaker is how you do it. And as you see, as I hover over it, it actually does pop up. So that's one thing. Another thing that you'll find is that you can't rename yourself like in Zoom. And the only way to change your display name in Webex, first of all, if you have a Webex profile, if you have a Webex account, you can change it in your Webex account, and then you'll be able to, that will be your name whenever you log into WebEx. If you do not have a WebEx account and you just have the app or you're not signed into it, then you should get the opportunity to change your name as you enter the meeting. But in my experience, and I've been using WebEx pretty consistently because my home court, DC Superior, uses WebEx. Sometimes it gives it to me and sometimes it doesn't. So WebEx can be a little bit of a mystery as far as what options it offers you. Another thing that's useful to be aware of is the layout, which is different again from Zoom. So in your upper right, you have this layout function. Grid is the gallery view we know and love. Stack puts the speaker in the front. So in this case, because Ernest was the last person speaking, he shows up for me. Side by side, I do like that. So I can kind of shrink and expand, make it bigger if I want to see it. So normally I set it up with that layout and you'll have the speaker there or you'll have their PowerPoint there. And the other thing that I find very useful when I'm interpreting in WebEx is that I can move someone to stage. It's kind of like pinning them. And you can imagine how helpful this would be if you are in a hybrid situation and the courtroom is just one small little video box is grid. And so what I tend to do is I move that small little video box to stage, and then I make it enormous so that I can actually see maybe not facial expressions exactly, but I can at least kind of see who's talking and moving around in there. So this is different from Zoom, and I wanted to, because they do use different terminology here. And lastly, I wanted to share what I'm doing right now, which is pretty cool. Like because Zoom, if you want to share your screen, what we've found is that you seem to have a pro account and you have to be signed into your application in order to actually share your Zoom windows when you share your entire desktop. Whereas WebEx, what you can do is you just click share up here and you share my meeting window. And that just sends you straight to that meeting window and you can share whatever you're doing on screen, which is excellent if you're doing something exactly like this, which is trying to teach WebEx to somebody. And you can see you have a lot of great options up here. The nice thing about WebEx is that what I have found is that there really are a ton of functionalities in WebEx, some of which mirror Zoom, some which Zoom doesn't have, but actually, some which WebEx has that Zoom doesn't have. Some of them are the same features that Zoom has, and WebEx has them too. But what I've seen with WebEx is that there are some pretty cool things that WebEx allows you to do that Zoom does not. And I wanted to point out that participants in chat is down here in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. So you can click that, see the participants list. In this case, as I scroll all the way down to the bottom of it, you can see our interpreters in the booths right now. These are not real people. These are recordings, which we will bring you to in just a moment. And you can see the status of everyone in the meeting, just like you can in Zoom. And then you have the chat over here as well. So what I'm going to show first here and then on the stream is how to access the channels as a listener. So this is what you're going to do. Some of you may have already found this because we've had it running the entire time. But this is what your listeners will experience. So if you are running an event and you have interpretation on that event, this is how your listeners will access it. There's a little globe down here in the lower left-hand corner. And right now I've got it on original audio. I can change that to any of the 3 languages that we have on this event, which I'm going to do. And right now I am now hearing Cantonese, but I'm turning it more and more towards the interpreter. And so right now I'm 100% hearing the interpreter. Webex allows you to control very granularly the levels of interpretation versus the floor. I'm turning it to floor because the Cantonese is somewhat distracting to me personally. So I have just moved it all the way over to original audio. So my channel is still selected. And so I move it all the way over to original audio and I don't hear the interpreter anymore. If I want to hear both, I can place it in the middle. And so this is one thing that's very different from Zoom, because Zoom, if you choose a channel, you really only hear the interpreter. Like you'll hear the original speaker kind of in the background at a very low volume, but you really are not going to be able to make out what they say. So if you have a certain amount of bilingualism, if you want to hear both languages, which is the case for a lot of people actually, you will be frustrated by Zoom. You're going to be constantly jumping channels. What I like about Webex's feature is that it's slightly less, idiot proof, as it were, I suppose, because you actually default when you choose a channel, you default to the center, and that might perplex people, and if they cannot figure out how to use the slider, whereas Zoom just puts you straight into what you're supposed to be hearing, which is the interpreter. So kind of pluses and minuses, right? You get some control, you lose some simplicity. But I think that this is really a great feature for, like I said, bilingual people, and it's what people have kind of come to expect who are using the more advanced simultaneous platforms. Now, if everyone over here in the Webex will kind of excuse me for a moment, I'm gonna let you guys play with this. And meanwhile, I'm gonna be talking to the people on the stream. So I'm gonna manipulate this in the same way, but on the device that's running the stream. So I think what I'll do is I'll actually just go ahead and stop sharing my meeting window. And so everyone here, you can continue to listen while I explain what I'm doing to people on the stream, but you guys can go ahead and click on that globe, play with interpretation, see what you think, bounce through the channels. If you understand Spanish, Ernest made us a lovely recording of a loop. So
if you understand Slovenian or Cantonese,
you'll be very confused.
Amy, what are the topics?
Let's see, I think Slovenian is talking about agriculture. And if I'm not mistaken, supposedly the Cantonese is talking about aviation or something of that nature. I will not say for sure if it is or isn't because I speak neither language.
And so while you all are doing that, you'll hear Tamber's explanation to the stream, and that'll be your floor audio that you can mix with Slovenian Cantonese or my loop of Spanish voiceover.
Exactly. So now I'm over on the stream. So for those of you who are on the stream, I am going to select the Slovenian channel, and I'm going to actually start my video over here so I'm at least facing it. Turn off this one, start this one. Much less charming. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, and what you see for everybody on the stream, first of all, you see that it's selected original audio. Now I'm going to go ahead and select Slovenian, just for fun. And right now you started to hear the Slovenian interpreter on the stream. And so it's in the middle. You're hearing that Slovenian interpreter balanced with my voice, right? And so I'm about to take that volume all the way over to the left to Slovenian. So you'll stop hearing me for a moment as you hear just Slovenian.
En majhen del, ki pa postaja večji, je usmerjen tudi v ekološko kmetovanje, predvsem pa tudi v integrirano kmetovanje. Praktično vso kmetijstvo, sploh recimo živinoreja, sadjarstvo, vinogradništvo.
Just a moment ago, you saw my lips moving on the stream, but you didn't actually hear me because I had moved it all the way over to interpreter, which is what your listener experience would be. And now if I bring it over to original audio, you hear just me. I have effectively eliminated the interpretation. And so that's what I was talking about just now for everybody in the WebEx who can manipulate these buttons. This is what they're able to do, is just slide this back and forth, remain on the channel, and just slide it back and forth. Like maybe if the speaker comes to a difficult part, they stop understanding very well, they can bring the interpreter back in until they're able to understand again. So I'm going to go ahead and remove. I'm going to put it back on original audio for everyone on the stream. And that is my listening demo. So I will go ahead and hand it back to Amy.
All right, thank you so much. So we've talked a little bit about what this new interface looks like for interpretation. And there are some interesting features. I've seen a lot of questions in the chat that have to do with recording and different things like that. And I think you're going to find that many of the same limitations that we become familiar with in Zoom are still limitations within WebEx as soon as you get into a bilingual or a multilingual meeting. And so once again, using interpretation by calling in and using phone audio likely is not going to allow you to access the channels. But we're going to talk about what the interpreter sees. So I show up and I'm the interpreter. Now, the cool thing is, like was mentioned before,
Na evropski ravni bi rekel, da je Evropa naredila prvi korak leta 2000.
The interpreter can be pre-designated and simply comes into the booth. So you come in and you're automatically the interpreter. Okay, so when I come in, I can choose my output, but one thing to notice is that there's no shortcut here. And I'm just going to make sure I don't get ahead of myself here. Okay, another thing I want for you to watch out for, because I will be showing an actual screen of an interpreter. So as you'll see in the next slide, one thing I want you to look for is when you change your input language, what you're listening to, it's going to automatically change your output language. So if you want to listen to your partner, you have to be careful that when you switch it, say, to Spanish, because you want to make sure that as you're interpreting into Spanish, that you pick up where your partner left off. As soon as you click that you're going to be listening to Spanish, it automatically assumes that you're going to be interpreting into English. And so you have to make sure you don't get put into the wrong channel. So that's something that you need to keep an eye on, because in Zoom, we may be used to the idea of toggling and what we're listening to doesn't affect our output channel. In this case, we might mess up some of our settings. And so we just have to be alert to that. And the next point that I would like to share is that there is no shortcut key. There's no hotkeys for the toggle. And I'm mentioning this because a lot of us, I wish we could kind of do a raise hands. I don't know if there's the raise hand function. I think there is. How many of you are familiar with having some sort of a program to use a foot pedal or to use a programmed mouse or something to have a shortcut to change your toggle for something that's going to be a little more dynamic, a lot more back and forth in the conversation? And in Webex, there is no toggle. Like there is a toggle, but there's no shortcut that you can program to use a foot pedal or to program a mouse to be able to do that quickly. So you are still going to be managing your mouse to, hit that exact spot to go back and forth. So yeah, as somebody who loves to have the hotkeys, whether it's using a Stream Deck, and what I mean, okay, so I see there's a question. I don't know what you mean about a shortcut. So for example, if you're in Zoom, I forget if it's Control-Alt-C or there's some sort of a combination of keys that will go back and forth between, like in my case, English and Spanish. So if I have a mouse that I can program or a foot pedal that I can program to execute that function with just one step, it'll make me be able to toggle back and forth just by, say, using a foot pedal rather than actually manipulating the mouse. And in Webex, hopefully, let's all cross our fingers, hopefully they fix that to where we can have that shortcut. So that's one thing to look out for. And I'll be, because at the end of the slides here, I will be sharing what it looks like, because interpreters can't share their screen. So I can't show you an actual screen through Webex itself. All right. And then there's another point that I would like to share. The next point is for those of you in the stream who asked, does Webex allow you to do relay? Yes, it does. Obviously, though, you have to have at least one language in common. So for example, if it was an interpreter who was designated to a booth that was Mixteco Spanish, and you have Spanish English, then whenever the Mixteco interpreter speaks Spanish, the interpreter who has Spanish and English can listen to Spanish rather than floor or original audio to be able to interpret into English. So you can have two interpreters interpreting simultaneously, providing relay. And we're going to talk about some of the issues that come up in terms of things to watch out for. It's not something that's come up for us that we've had to do. However, the facility is there. The function allows for it. And you can also hear your partner. So you can hear what they sound like within the platform. However, if you turn your video on as the interpreter, everybody can see you. So we'll talk about that at the end in terms of the pros and cons. And the next point that I would like to share before we actually take a look at the program itself is there is the handoff button. Now, in our practice that we've had, we found that the handoff button is not particularly helpful. It does send a message, but it will send it to the next interpreter in order in your same language pair. You don't get to choose who you're asking to take over the microphone. So in case you have a petite équipe and you have 3 interpreters, it's going to go in order between interpreter 1, interpreter 2, interpreter 3. And it's not exactly 100% functional in a way. And you also can't request to take the microphone. So there still has to be some planning between all of that. So now we're going to take a closer look, and I'm going to share the interpreter screen with you so that you can see what that looks like. And we're going to be using the example of the Slovenian interpreter, which is a recording that is continuously going. All right. So I'm just going to get that ready to share with you.
And while we're waiting, I have a question from Garrett in the chat. Hello, Garrett, who asks, you can have more than 2 interpreters assigned to a language pair, and that is in fact the case. I will be demoing that here shortly when we talk about hosting and launching interpretation.
All right, I hope everyone can now see this. And is it looking clear? You might have a little bit of an infinity mirror view. Right. So what I would like to share here is the interpreter control. All right, so you see that interpretation shows which direction it's going. So it's going from English to Slovenian. And if you go to the participant list, you can actually see quite easily which language the interpreter is going into. And the nice thing about it is that it says the actual word English and Spanish or English and Slovenian. It doesn't only have the initials, because outside of our special group of professionals, not everybody is familiar with all of those initials, right? Okay, and so here is where we see other controls. Now, because I don't have another English Slovenian interpreter in the booth on this for this device to work with, there's no option to hand off. So it already recognizes that there's only one interpreter in my language pair. And right now it says that I'm listening to original audio or floor. So I don't have the ability to see which level until I actually choose a different source. But watch what happens when I choose English instead of floor. Okay, well, since I was already going into Slovenian, nothing happened. But let's say I went into Slovenian to hear my partner. What's going to happen on the English channel? If you're listening on the English channel, get ready, because it's going to be something else. I just had to switch it back because it automatically swapped to English. Did you see that? I'll do that again. And if you're on the English channel, I apologize, you're going to be hearing Slovenian. So when I went from floor, and I just have my controls back and forth, as soon as I choose Slovenian to hear my partner, it popped to English. All right, so that's the one thing you have to look out for. You want to hear your partner, but you still want to be speaking your target language, which is the same language your partner is going to be speaking. So once you choose a different language other than floor, now you have the ability to choose, do you want to hear just your partner or your pivot language, the relay interpreter, or do you want to hear the speaker? It is a little bit difficult with if you'll notice, as the interpreter, I have this share at the top of my menu, and when I click share, I have no options. So as the interpreter, I'm not allowed to share my meeting window, and we're going to talk about that later as well, because that's an important consideration. Okay, and so if I needed to listen to one of the other languages, you'll notice it's not showing me any languages other than my own combination. I have floor, English, and Slovenian. So the fact that there's Cantonese interpretation happening, unless the Cantonese interpreter were speaking English, then I could listen to that interpreter and their English rendition, but there's no way that I can ever hear the Cantonese because that's not my language pair. So it automatically is going to keep that language away from me and not interrupting me. Okay. And again, as an interpreter, I cannot be co-host. As the interpreter, I have no record button. If I click on more options, there's not much I can do other than switch audio or copy the link. So really, it's kind of interesting how limited the functions are when someone is an interpreter. And I just want you to kind of put a pin in that because we'll be talking about that a little bit later. Let's see, is there anything else, Tamber or Ernest, that you'd like to add in terms of the interpreter interface?
I do not.
All right, I think we're ready to go on to the next section then.
And we will be discussing how it is that you make this happen. If you want to run out of this session and you can't like run to your nearest store, but if you wanted to activate and start Webex Simuling tonight, you probably wouldn't be able to. But as soon as you could, this is what you would have to do. The very first thing that you have to do is, and this is pretty straightforward, is you would create a Webex account. And this is a very attractive price point. You have a $15 a month. The tier is Meat. For a $15 a month Meat plan, you would have an account that could then have interpretation, simultaneous interpretation added to it. I will say this, there is a value added feature, and I've had people write me and saying they're paying $30 a month for simultaneous interpreting. That is actually live AI captioning, which is a separate feature and costs double what simultaneous interpreting costs. That is completely different. That would be somebody who is speaking English and then having that by a machine be captioned into one of 100 languages automatically. That is not what we were talking about. But a lot of people, including at Webex, get confused about that. And so you have to set them straight. This is the next step. You then have to, at least as of a couple of weeks ago, you yourself cannot enable simultaneous for your newly created $15 a month Meet Webex account. You have to contact tech support. I was able to do it by chat. And I want to give credit here to Tamber, who was truly the trailblazer among our group, who braved days of back and forth with tech support and emails and a lot of going in circles to be able to activate her account. And so I was able to contact tech support and say, I want to enable simultaneous interpreting. And they said, okay, here's this link to an article about how we don't provide interpreters for events. And so I clarified that that was not what I was looking for. And then finally, but I was able to give them Tamber's ticket number. And so right away they saw what her request was and what had been done. And so the magic words are enable simultaneous interpreting, something like that. I'll look for the exact verbiage once I'm done speaking again. And so that was at like 11 o'clock at night. And then the next morning I had an email saying, you're good, it's been activated. And so that means that I had the possibility of turning it on for my account. It was not actually up and running yet. So there are steps. You then have to get into your Webex account settings and actually enable this for your account. And so let's look at this. The thing to understand about Webex is that Webex is fundamentally an enterprise platform, meaning it's meant to be used by big businesses. So like Gigantocorp has a single administrator and then 1,000 people under them that have Webex accounts, right? And so it's a little trickier when you're just a single person because you basically have two different Webex sites. You have the Webex site that you use to create meetings and launch meetings, and then the Webex site, a separate site, separate login that you use for configuring your account. And so if you go straight to, and I'm going to type this in the chat here, if you go straight to admin.webex.com, you get into your account settings. And if you try to jump to this page from the main Webex, Webex does something that I think is just really cruel, which is they first take you to this page, which is where you want to go. They take you to this page for about 2 seconds. And then it blinks and it takes you to another page that is completely useless. And I don't know why. But you do eventually get where you're going. And then you click on the bottom sprocket at the left where you see organization settings. and then that, scroll down within that, and you get to simultaneous interpreting. It defaults to being off, you turn it on, and then you have the option of enabling languages for your account. And there are over 100 languages to choose from. But once you enable those languages, those are the languages that you have to pick from when you are setting your meetings. And so it's a little bit different than Zoom. At this stage of the game in Zoom, you would have the default languages and then the option to add custom languages. And so if you wanted to make Arabic, because Arabic is not a default language selection in Zoom, you could make an Arabic channel. You can make a Klingon channel. Right now on my Zoom account, I have a Klingon channel just because sometimes I demonstrate that you can really make up your own. And with Webex, you are limited to their preset. So they have 100 languages, and so there are obscure languages there. But if it's not on there, you're going to have somebody working in a differently labeled channel if they speak a language that's not a pre-select there for Webex. And so we are almost home. We have activated it with tech support. We have activated it for our account, but we still have to set it for our individual meeting. And so here we are, just configuring our meeting. You set the time, you set the title, and then at the very bottom above the cancel and schedule buttons, you have an option that says show advanced options. When you click on that, you now have to go to scheduling options here at the bottom. And when you click on that, you get to enable interpretation for this particular meeting. Now, again, we're going to draw some comparisons to Zoom. You notice if you look on here that once I selected interpretation, the field above it, breakout sessions, was grayed out. You cannot have interpretation and breakout sessions in the same Webex session. Additionally, interpretation in Webex forces you to assign at least one interpreter ahead of time in order for you to have that function running when you open the meeting. Whereas in Zoom, you can enable the function, but opt out of pre-assigning any interpreter. And if you do all of these steps and then save the meeting, when you open the meeting, you will have the ability to have interpretation. And like Amy said, if you pre-assign an interpreter and they come in and Webex properly identifies them, they come in the booth. The host doesn't have to do what they do in Zoom to launch interpretation. And so this is where you would pre-assign your interpreters at the time you are creating your meeting. And you first do it by channel and then add an interpreter. And if you want a different channel, you would then create that and add interpreters to that. And so let's look at what this is going to be actually in the meeting. So I'm going to transition into sharing my Webex screen. I as host have a view of the interpretation globe, same as you all, but the difference is I have this button below the audio selection that says Manage Interpretation. And so I'm going to hit Manage Interpretation, and it shows me who I already have in the booth. I have my Spanish interpretation going, which is just my laptop here playing some audio on a booth connected to the Webex mic through virtual cables. I have Amy's Slovenian interpreter device, and I have the Cantonese interpreting device. Now, now that once these booths have been created, I can't eliminate them. And so we have these booths, and we're going to continue to have these booths for the duration of this meeting. I can add interpreters. And so if I wanted to, for example, and I'm seeing, I've got my chat here popping up in the corner of the window. Nobody DM me. If I want to add an interpreter, I can pick from anybody. I'm not actually going to do it, but I could, for example, I know that Santiago from Colorado is a Spanish interpreter. And so I would stick him in the booth, pick him from among the meeting participants, and then I would hit apply here to make that happen. And so now that I have a second interpreter in the Spanish booth, these garbage icons appear over the interpreters. And so I can go ahead and click here. And here is, I'm back to having one interpreter. And because they're the only interpreter in the booth, I can't eliminate them. Likewise, if I wanted to add anybody to the Slovenian or the Cantonese booth, and I can even create a new language. And so I'd say, not create a new language, make a new booth. And so if I want to have an Albanian booth, I can. And then again, I'm going to select from my interpreters and stick Hank from Louisville into the booth for Albanian. And as soon as I hit apply, that would take effect. And so because I haven't launched this yet, I think I still can get out of this. And so we are not bound to have an Albanian booth for the rest of this meeting. And I did want to share one interesting little shortcut here, which is from among the participant list. If you're able to see this, I can right click on one of the participants. Why can I only see Amy as a participant? Tamber, do you have thoughts on this? Oh, here we go. I was searching for Amy previously. Now I see the full participant list. And so I'm going to take Barbara, hello, and I'm going to right click on her name, and you'll see that it gives me the option to change her role, and I can make her a presenter, or make her a host, or make her a co-host, or make her an interpreter, which is a different way of going about things compared to Zoom. But it doesn't really do anything. As soon as I click Make Interpreter, it just opens this window for me. It doesn't preload her in the Spanish. It doesn't automatically put her in the booth. It just opens this window. So the feature is there, not actually that useful. Tamber or Amy, do you guys have any thoughts on the hosting or anything else that you guys would like to talk about this? I did think of one more thing before I hand this over. Hosts and co-hosts are not eligible to be made interpreters. And so, for example, if I wanted to add an interpreter in the Spanish booth, you can see, for example, this person call-in user is grayed out. They're not eligible. You can't assign a participant who is using phone audio. That's actually really nice that they have that language. I wish Zoom did. For myself, it says you can't assign the host, presenter, or a co-host to be interpreter. And so good on Webex that they're being transparent about why some things aren't working. And again, it is only the meeting host, not a co-host, that can manage and manipulate the interpretation function and interface. So that said, now that I thought of that after the fact, Amy and Tamber, anything else you guys would like to add to this?
Yeah, just briefly, we had tested in the past handing off hosting to be able to hand off managing interpretation. At the beginning, it didn't allow that, but now it does. So if you do make someone else host, they are able to then manage interpretation. So it seems like there's still things they're working out, language that's changing, and some of these functions are also still kind of evolving.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and we hope that they continue to iterate the platform and make changes, because there are some things that we would like to see changed. And guys, this is a real life simulation. I mean, you can see that we have not completely mastered this platform yet, but we are working through it and doing trial and error. And, here we are, still standing. I have one more slide before I hand this back over, and then we will get in the home stretch. So I wanted to share this slide to talk through the differences between the platforms in terms of cost and function, if you were thinking about which one you wanted to use. And so here is our slide again with the spectrum of platforms, again, with the high end and the low end in the middle. And so I want to take these and move them into something two-dimensional, where we're looking at them not just in terms of their functions, but also their cost. And so if we have this plot and we look at the functionality with respect to the cost, the low end, the conventional platforms are low cost, but also low functioning because they don't have a simultaneous feature. The middle ground sort of would be, or the high end would be Kudo VoiceBox or the RSI platforms that cost a lot, but have a lot of bells and whistles. And then the midpoint sort of would be Zoom, which is pretty cheap for what you get, much cheaper than what you're paying for on the high end, and has decent but limited functionality. And so Webex, in theory, kind of shatters this dichotomy between, can you live within Zoom's limitations for the low cost, or are you willing to fork out $1,000 a day, literally $1,000 for a 1 hour meeting, for using Kudo or Interprify? Webex kind of shatters that that paradigm, because WebEx offers, and again, this sounds like a pitch, but I don't love WebEx. WebEx offers a lot of features. You cannot deny that. It offers, listen to your partner from one device, do relay, and it's much cheaper even than Zoom, if you can accept the limitations and the kind of clunkiness of the platform. And so these are all considerations. We encourage you to, especially for $15 a month, get a WebEx account, reach out to us. We'll give you Tamber's ticket number so you can streamline dealing with tech support, or I'll give you mine if Tamber doesn't want to, and play around with it to really get a feel for it and see if you like it, see if you can get some clients on board. And that would be a good way to get a feel for whether this is something that's going to work for you, especially if you have clients who are already using WebEx, because the best is if your client goes through all of that and you just have to show up and interpret. But you would probably still have to give them some guidance along the way. So that is it for me. I will pass this over now to Amy to take us home. And I will circle back to the chat and look at any questions that we're going to pull out for later.
All right. Thank you so much. I think that was an excellent introduction to where we're at now. Talking about use case recommendations. Now that we've seen kind of an overview of what we can do with WebEx and the simultaneous function, let's talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. So here's point number 1. Ernest, there you go. So if your client or your court must use WebEx, everybody, round of applause, we're all happy about it. Now there's more options. I know, for example, Oregon courts and other courts really are obligated to use WebEx. And so a lot of interpreters have been going through some difficult times using phones and doing different types of things and trying to duct tape things together, right? So now we have more options. So you can click to the next point. So yay, we'll give that a green check mark. Okay. Now the next one, if your event will require relay, this is an affordable solution. So in the past, when we needed to have relay in Zoom, and I wouldn't say past, it still happens, right? It takes extra training. And I think Ernest and Tamber can, really speak to this a lot more. It takes a lot more training to get the protocols down for a larger group of interpreters when you have multiple languages and you know that it's going to be interactive and there's going to be Q&A. And so here, as long as we've got a language in commons, usually that's English, right? For our purposes, relay is much easier, right? If we know relay is going to happen, as an interpreter, we make sure we're listening to English when we have the possibility of needing to take relay. All right, let's see our next point. Okay, if you don't need breakout rooms and interpretation, this is a good solution. Just like was mentioned, you cannot have breakout rooms and interpretation in the same meeting. So even if you don't have interpreters right away, if there's going to be any need for interpretation in the meeting, it has to be set up in advance. It's not something you can last minute, oh, I guess we do have an interpreter case. Sure, let's just start interpretation. I mean, in Zoom, you've got that flexibility. However, with WebEx, you either have it or you don't. Same thing with breakout rooms. You're either going to have breakout rooms or you won't. So in this case, if you know for sure you don't need breakout rooms and you're going to have interpretation, then yes, WebEx is a good solution for this. Okay, let's go to our next point. So if your event is more of a conference and you know that your users will be able to handle the more granular audio control, then let's say, yes, this is a pro. Okay. And the reason I say this is because when you first log in, like if all of you right now were to switch over to one of the other languages, suddenly you're going to be at half and half. And so you have to actually go in and move that slider to listen to what you really want to hear, excuse me. So if a lot of times Zoom is being used for the public outreach because you choose a channel and it's pretty much set. You can either choose to hear a tiny bit of the other language or you hear none of the other language when things are working right. Let's not talk about the bugs because everything's got bugs, right? So if you know your users are going to be able to handle that more granular audio control, it can be a great solution. And I believe it was, I'm not sure if it was Tamber or Ernest who mentioned, if you've got those bilingual attorneys who want to hear what their client is saying, but they also want to hear what is the interpreter interpreting, they can still do that because they can put their language to Spanish and they can still have the option of hearing all the other speakers as well. So it does give a lot more control for folks who do want to be able to go back and forth between what they're hearing or want to be able to hear both. Unlike Zoom, where if they want to hear their client and they want to hear the simultaneous interpretation, they have to choose one or the other. All right. Now, what are some of the other pros? It does encourage the use of technicians and hosts who are not interpreters. And why do we say that? Because the interpreter cannot be a host or a co-host. So either A, the interpreter has to have two devices if you're managing and you're a consultant interpreter, or you need to have a tech support person, or you need to have someone who is not the interpreter running the meeting. So this is actually a positive thing because it's not encouraging the multitasking that we sometimes can get ourselves pulled into. And if you look at the Webex website itself, it mentions interpreters will get fatigue, and it even mentions the 30-minute mark. Interpreters will ask for breaks. Interpreters work with teams, and that's why they have the handoff button. So it's really great to see a best practice being reinforced on the Webex website itself. So I'm going to say that's a pro. All right, next point. Not everything is a pro though, right? We've got some cons. So if the interpreter wants to have visual cues with their partner, not just using a handoff button and then looking at their microphone to see did they start or listening to hear they're about to start, you know, those types of things. If you really want to have visual cues, but you don't want everybody to see you on screen making, you know, your gestures or like, you know, if you want to have those visual cues or you don't want to be seen by the attendees, you still might have to have a back channel. And you might have to have something else to be able to have a video feed of your partner, because if the interpreter turns on their camera, they're seen by everybody. So that's kind of a con. So that's why we say the handoff button is not super functional as it is right now. And it's, you know, if you don't want to be on video in front of the attendees, but you want to see your partner. Okay, so we're going to call that a con. You all agree with me on that? Okay, next point. Interpreters still need to plan ahead for handoffs because, like we said, the button itself is not super ideal. You can't ask your partner, like, let's say they feel like they're on a roll, but they're going 30, 35, 40 minutes, and you're like, hello. You can't ask them. You can't cue them to say, hey, you ready to you know, hand over to me? Unless you've got some other function as far as turning on your camera or some other cue. So you still have to plan ahead. So the built-in function for handoffs, not super ideal as it stands. Hopefully it gets better as they continue to develop it. Any disagreement on this so far?
Amy, I wanted to add a point about the handover, and I apologize since I'm multitasking. You may have already said this, but the problem with the handover function is that if you are the passive interpreter, once you accept, it unmutes you, but it doesn't mute the outgoing active interpreter. So if you give up the microphone to your partner, you have to be sitting monitoring to see when their mic, and it doesn't go green, it disappears, which is a flaw in the UX, I think. And so there's still margin there to have both interpreters speaking at once, unless the interpreter who's about to give up the microphone is watching their partner's mic like a hawk in the participant list. Like literally you have to have your cursor over it, or else when they activate, their mic goes from red to invisible, which I think is really counterintuitive.
Well, and if you're listening to your partner because you're on the same channel to listen to it, you'll be able to hear when your partner starts, but that's a little bit less than ideal if you're not seeing each other. So again, it's not the greatest function. And I think Kathy also mentioned, and I think we may have mentioned in the chat earlier, when you do the handoff, like let's say, for example, that myself, Ernest, and Tamber are all working as a petite équipe, all three of us. Whoever's interpreter number one, when you say handoff, it's just going to go to number two. And then from number two, it's going to go to number three. So let's say interpreter number two had to leave and I go to handoff and I'm number one, it's not going to anybody. So it's a little bit less intuitive. You can't really control who you're asking to hand off to, nor can you ask to receive the mic from whoever's going. So We're going to call that a con still. All right, next point. All right, so here's another con. And again, participants may get confused by the level of control they have over their language channel because they start at a 50-50 mix. So not everyone is going to know exactly where to go to find, once they find their language, they still have to choose how much they want to hear of each. And so depending on your audience, depending on their devices, depending on the level of control that you're able to share, that might be a con right there. All right, next point. Okay. And as compared to other platforms, it's more rigid. I think this is one we could probably all talk about a bit. You can't change as many things in meeting. A lot of things you have to go back to your admin settings to be able to make changes. It's difficult to be able to get a webinar versus how easy it is to get a webinar with Zoom. And so there's just several things that can feel a little bit more clunky because it is meant to be an enterprise level solution with its own IT department running the main settings. And so there's not a lot of things that you can really change in meeting as easily as in others. And our next point. Like we mentioned, interpreters cannot be host and the interpreter on the same device. So if the host needs help to fix something, they can't designate the interpreter to be host to fix it, which is a good thing because that means the interpreter is not wearing so many hats. You're just wearing one hat at a time. So that's a plus. Next point here. So again, the division of services, instead of saying division of labor, it's division of services is a net positive. Let's all focus on interpreters on interpreting and tech support on providing that tech support. So the next slide that I have talks about kind of the things that consultant interpreters and we in TEA do is we try to get to know our clients, get to know what is their preferred platform based on their level of familiarity. Find an affordable solution. If they need Relay, we are likely to bring in Webex because it's going to require less training and it's going to be easier for everyone. But tech support is needed regardless of the platform chosen. We got to let interpreters interpret and have these tech considerations taken care of by other folks. And again, it's important to understand what is the main goal of the event to be able to recommend the right solution. Whether that's court, whether that's a conference, whether it's outreach, it's a school board meeting, whatever it is, we need to understand what is that goal. And so those are the kinds of things that we, as TEA Language Solutions, we talk to our clients to make sure we understand what their goal is so that we can then recommend which platform and which use case scenario is going to work best for them. All right. So I think now we have a few minutes for Q&A. So are there any questions that you noticed, Tamber, Ernest, that we can jump to first?
Yeah, I'd actually really like to, I kind of addressed James' question in the chat about moving interpreters for hand gestures. And I'm not sure, James, if you were actually talking about ASL. However, Webex does have this very nice feature that is great for ASL, which you don't have in Zoom. Like you cannot control attendee view in Zoom in the meeting, at the meeting level. You must be running a webinar, whereas here in Webex you can. And I'm actually going to go ahead and I was doing it before when Amy was running her virtual camera, but I'm going to do it again with that focus. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and lock all of your view to my view. So what I'm doing, I'm going to actually share my meeting screen first so I can show you exactly where that control is. So let me full screen first so it doesn't look weird. And then I will share my meeting window. Okay, so as a host, I have this extra option under layout that you all don't have, and that is sync my stage for everyone. So I'm going to sync my stage for everyone. So I'm locking your attendee view, right? So I'm syncing it. And now you're only going to see what I want you to see. And I'm just checking the stream, which includes my view. Okay, good. That is exactly what I want. Now, I could go ahead and move, let's say I'm the Spanish interpreter. Or sorry, ASL interpreter, Amy's our speaker. I moved myself to stage, see? So I just put myself in there. Ernest could come on video if he wanted. And then you would have all three of us on the stage. And this is what your attendees see, right? So if I stop sharing my meeting window right now, you're still going to see the three of us. So that I think is really, really valuable for ASL purposes, because you can make your meeting much more accessible. Whereas in Zoom, if you're having a meeting and you have an ASL interpreter, you kind of have to give the deaf attendees the instruction that they need to pin the interpreter, and you have to actually allow them to do a thing called multi-pin, so that they can pin the speaker and the interpreter. So it could be kind of a heavy lift, whereas in WebEx, voila, you can do it for them. And I think that's a really amazing accessibility feature that WebEx has created. I don't know if they meant to do it, but they did. So I'll go ahead and unlock the screen so you can play with it however you want, but I just wanted to show you that.
And I will take a question. I've been trying to compile the questions here as we've been going. And one question that we had from Margie was, will there be handouts? And the answer is no, but we have a blog post on our website, which once I'm done talking, again, I just am not that good at multitasking. Once I'm done talking, I will copy in the initial blog post that Tamber put together about WebEx Simul, and we are due to have a follow-up that is a deeper dive into some of the things that we've discovered once we've used the platform more. And so you can expect that within the next week or so. This is my pledge to the world, is that will be up on our site within a week. And so that will be in lieu of handouts for this session. And another question from James was, is closed captioning only available in English? And I answered that sort of tangentially during my section, which is that they do have AI captions for $30 a month. They do have AI captions from English to all of these other languages, but not the other way around.
And it's important to understand too that it's not actually, like, if someone's speaking Spanish on the meeting, it's not actually picking up the Spanish. Like, I have tried this and it gives me gibberish across the bottom of the screen if I speak Spanish on the meeting. So what it's actually doing is it's taking the English and it's translating it really into a lot of languages. So WebEx has included not a small number of languages, and not just kind of your typical Western European languages. It has actually included a lot of languages in that closed captioning feature, but it is automatic transcription and automatic translation. So decide for yourself what the value of that may be. And be aware, if you actually are having a multilingual meeting, those captions are going to look really weird if someone speaks a language other than English.
And you know, that seems to be the way that these platforms are going. I'll be honest with you. You know, we've been we're trying to get feedback to Zoom since this feature came out, saying, you know, let us listen to our partners, let us do relay, and they have received it. We know for a fact that they have received it, and there have been really minor changes to the platform, but what they did do was acquire an AI company for doing AI subtitles. And so that seems to be the way that these platforms are going, is that they want to really leverage AI to depend less on human interpreters. And so take that for what it's worth. We still would love to see Zoom fix its or continue to evolve its feature, and hopefully WebEx will evolve the feature as time goes on. Because I will say this to Zoom's credit, the feature is more user-friendly and accessible now than it was when it first came out. And while I say this, I am copying into the chat the link to Tamber's blog post about the Simul feature from our blog. And so keep an eye out there, and that's where you will see the sequel to this, where we talk through some of the things that we discovered as we really got into using it. We had several questions about recording, and some of those were answered in the chat. The short answer is the real nuances of recording streaming is things that we're still playing with. It's a process, because these platforms have a lot of different layers, and so understanding all of it inside and out takes time. But one thing that Amy did mention is if you wanted to record a meeting and even record it in different channels, you could use screen recording software, which then you're not dependent on anything that's running through the WebEx. You're just literally running something that records whatever is seen and heard on your screen, which is something that I've done. We particularly like Snagit, and That would
using
allow you.
OBS right now. So the OBS software that we kind of mentioned before, Open Broadcast Studio, it's for live streaming. But it is also very robust for having a virtual camera, and it is also something that you can make really great recordings with. So that's one way to definitely get exactly what you're hearing on screen. We assume and have not yet fully tested that WebEx recording is likely exactly like Zoom. Like a local recording will probably pick up exactly what the computer doing the recording is hearing. And for sure, there is just absolutely no way it could be possible that if you were doing a cloud recording, that it would pick up all the language. It would pick up the language channels. So I would say that we haven't tested this fully, but this is kind of our working hypothesis, just based on how Zoom works and like kind of logicking it up.
And if I can just add as well, in Zoom, it's really easy to allow anyone to record, whether they're a co-host or an attendee. Well, if not an attendee in a meeting, I should say. It's really easy to allow people to make a local recording. And so it's not a big deal. Oh, you're gonna record? Okay, great. I'll just allow it. No big deal. You can do it on the fly. WebEx is not so flexible. You have to really dig into some settings that are very difficult to find to allow other people other than the host to record.
I was trying to do it. I know that it's possible to allow people other than the host to record. And I was working on that this afternoon and just could not find it. I know it exists, but I cannot do it.
Yeah. So I think that's a great case in point to show, that WebEx, while it does have this really great feature, and it's a feature that surpasses Zoom in terms of being able to hear your partner and have relay, but it is not quite as flexible in terms of those last minute changes. Does anybody have a client who does things at the last minute? Raise your hand. No? Yes?
Yeah. And I mean, and there's weird things that happen with WebEx that that are definitely bugs. Like, for example, this afternoon, we were trying to we did not intend to have a Spanish channel. But the way I set up the meeting, I set it up a long time ago, like 10 days ago, with a Spanish channel, because we didn't know that we were doing Slovenian specifically and Cantonese specifically. So I put Spanish. And then we can't delete the Spanish booth in the meeting. So we tried to delete it outside the meeting. And there was no way to delete that booth. I deleted it in the meeting setup. Like, I actually went in, edited the meeting, deleted the Spanish booth. The only one there, and this is true, the only one there is Slovenian. And I could not get rid of the Spanish booth. So I would save, there should only be Slovenian, Spanish booth is there, and we can't explain it. So, and I think it's just kind of the way that like WebEx's backend architecture is so vast. That we've just kind of run into things trying to accomplish different objectives with WebEx. It'll take you through like several layers of sign in, and then it'll boot you out, and then it'll have you enter your password again. And we're not sure why it does this. We just think that it's just so huge, and they've built it so fast. Like a year ago, honestly, WebEx was not nearly as robust as it is now, and they've been really adding a lot of great features. At the same time, I think they're maybe incorporating, they're just running into some creakiness on that.
Yeah. Something else about just the general awkwardness of WebEx, and some of this is the learning curve, just because we're so used to Zoom and where everything is. But some of it is just because it is genuinely clunky. We still to this day don't know how much it costs to have webinar enabled on your plan, because it's not like Zoom where there's transparent pricing on the page where you set up your subscription. You can set up your meeting, but then webinars, I think they keep like in the back, so to speak. Like somebody has to actually contact you from sales, and I got as far as having somebody contact me from sales, but a webinar I think is meant to be a scalable big enterprise solution, which probably means it's really expensive. And so when I said that I was a single person that I was interested in seeing about webinar, that was the last I heard from sales. And so there's that level of kind of opacity and just convoluted layers of bureaucracy in dealing with WebEx, unfortunately.
And that's probably because originally WebEx it was an enterprise solution, right? Like, it wasn't like Zoom did try to be for the people, right? And that's why Zoom was for the people at the beginning of the pandemic. So many people were using it to the level that it sort of surprised them and busted up their security protocols, right? But WebEx, looking at the architecture, you can see that they designed it to be kind of more of a solution that's meant for companies, just by the fact that, you know, you have a separate site administration center where you control organization-wide settings, which is great if you're an organization. If you're a single person with an account, you're really confused as to why half your settings are over there on the site admin center, and the other that you have to go through multiple layers of sign-in to get to, and then why your other settings are in your regular kind of meeting portal. And that's something that we've kind of had to fight with a lot.
Yes. So we have 8 minutes left to go, and we will stay in here until they shut the lights off. But before, because I know some people are starting to peel away, I did want to put up our final slide, which is our contact information. And so this is our email, info@tealanguagesolutions.com. You have our individual and joint Twitters and our website. And so really, we hope you've enjoyed the session. We would love any feedback you may have, and we would really love to be a resource to you in any way. If you want to do a private run through of WebEx and, you know, interpret, and we walk you through it, we would love to. If your client calls you tomorrow and says, we need you Monday morning on WebEx, and by the way, we have no idea how this thing works, that is something that we could help with, or really anything else in between. If you want to have somebody on a meeting just to record it, if you want to do a stream of a meeting or something, any of that we are glad to help with, and not just WebEx, but also Zoom, and not just Zoom, but other platforms, because we've done work with other platforms where you have to kind of duct tape together a solution to do simultaneous or to do streaming through other platforms. And so we will go back to our Q&A. I will take down these slides and I will copy our email into the chat. And I have a Zoom question that I would like to get to because I love talking about Zoom, but I'm going to see if we get through everything on WebEx first. We
I
had a
also want to say,
question.
if you raise your hand, we can also unmute your microphone.
Oh yeah, you all have been in silence long enough.
Yes. So if you don't want to type, and if you want to raise your hand, I'll make it possible for you to unmute.
And we had a question. I see some points coming together here, because we had a question that was, can call-in users access the interpretation channel, or must they be in the app? They have to be using the app. If you notice, when I demonstrated hosting, somebody who was dialed in, it literally would not let me put them in the booth. And so as far as I know, there is not a platform that lets you, dial 1 for English, dial 2 for Spanish when you're connecting to a video platform. And so everything has to run through the program that's downloaded on your device, either an app on your phone or tablet, or your client, the desktop application. And so, when we talk about our services and what we do, and this was a question actually that somebody asked, and I'm not remembering who it was, but it was, what is the process of educating a client? What is the process of figuring out how you're going to use this thing? A lot of it is materials and processes, meaning, okay, this is what you need to tell people they can't dial in. You need to tell your interpreters that they can't connect from a browser. Would be for Zoom. And here's the script of instructions for guiding listeners on getting into a channel. And here's how we're going to read it over the floor audio, which is especially relevant for WebEx, because your interpreters can't bounce back and forth between the booth and being on the floor. Once they're in the booth, that's where they are. That's where they're going to stay. And so thinking through all of the issues, how do we get people to connect through the correct device the first time? How do we, once they're in the meeting, get them into the channel and then orient them on it? And so something like WebEx, it's a gift and a curse that the listening function is more robust, because you have all these features, but then that's that much more to explain to people. So if I did a WebEx meeting tomorrow, I would have a slide like I showed you, and talk through in both languages, or in all the languages in the meeting, and talk people through and say, here's the slider. If you push it this way, you will only hear the interpreter. If you push it this way, you will only hear the floor. Something like that, because that's going to be the learning curve for your listeners. And then
I
the
just wanted
question about
to
bridging.
Yeah, I wanted to address the question that Adrian asked. Adrian Arias in Oregon has asked about the audio-only participants who dial in from any type of phone. And so that's correct. The simultaneous function is not available over the phone. And so in terms of the digital divide and haves not, um, a lot of the courts have created their own pods inside the court to allow people to connect virtually. The other option, and we have a blog post about it as well, is actually having the court allow a conference call number to be used that's accessible to the public, but have it bridged, meaning you use a special computer to connect to a language channel for that number specifically. So you would say, to dial in for this language, you call this number. And so for a court that knows they're going to have people calling in that they need Spanish, they can call in, but it does require your court IT to have that set up for them. And so here in Fresno and the federal court, they do have a number that is specifically used by interpreters, and it could be used as a bridge. In this case, to put the person on channel, even if they're connecting over the phone, but it's not available for people to just dial in. There's no way for them to choose a language.
And so what we've done for events where clients have asked this of us is you just create a different phone number. And so you give people a number and say, if you want to hear the meeting in French, dial this number. If you want to hear the meeting in English, dial this number. So that's how that would work. And that's beyond our skill set right now, is like hacking a phone thing so that they can literally press 1 for English. I wanted to
now we just give them different phone numbers.
Hey, but that's still, I mean, literally you guys created this setup. So, don't sell yourself short.
We do have a raised hand from Ada.
Okay, finally somebody speaks.
Oh, so I'll go ahead and unmute you, Ada.
Go ahead.
You should be able to unmute.
Okay, and everybody, did you just see her mic went from red to invisible unless you were hovering over it? Go ahead, Ada.
I just have a question. When you're setting up the account, you said you have to talk to the tech support from Webex. You only do it that once. I mean, once you set it up, you don't have to do it for every meeting.
Correct. That's to enable the feature on your account. And so once you do that, you have that ability, and then you yourself can then turn it on, turn it off, enable it for certain meetings or not. But it's that initial step that you need to have done. And Zoom in its instructions tells you the same thing, but all of us were able to just go in. If you have an eligible account, you just go in, and you don't have to go to a separate website. You go in and move the little thing to the right, it turns blue, and then you've got it up and running.
Yeah, and I think that probably over time, because this is literally, it's been 3 weeks or a month or something like that since they actually, it was right around the ATA conference, so what, the 27th of October. So it's really been only a short time. And so right now, who knows, it may already be in the process of changing or changed, but it just wasn't provisioned to accounts, right? I imagine that over time, since they have made it available at this level of account, as soon as you have this level of account, it will automatically be in your site admin center for you to activate it, and you won't have to call. So this may be something because it's new and not like a forever barrier, right?
Okay, thank you.
We had one final question, which I want to get to because it's kind of my soapbox at chew on these matters, and then I think we would be able to close and maybe get final thoughts from our other speakers. But we had a question from Hank, who asks, can you run a report to see how many people used the language interpretation function? And as far as I know, you can't, and that's a big blind spot. I think, and this is a controversial position among interpreters, but for those of you who are really geeky and think a lot about these things, the big request that people ask about Zoom is they really want to be able to listen to their partner, and they really want to be able to do relay on a single device. And I think that's great, but it's doable with 2 devices. It's awkward, but it's doable. But what you absolutely cannot do, and is completely shrouded in mystery and opaque, is know at any given time who's listening at all, who's in what channel, or move people between channels. And so I personally, and this is my hot take, I think that it would add more value to the platform to have transparency in listener channel selection and give hosts or even co-hosts the ability to move people into a channel. I think that would add more value to the platform than letting people listen to their partners. Because
Save a heck a lot of court time too.
we're just used to the, oh boy, yeah, we're just used to the duct tape at this point. So I don't know, maybe we have duct tape Stockholm syndrome. So on that note, we want to thank everybody for being here. Adrian, I'm sorry I didn't get to your question about Zoom, but I did DM you. We will geek out about Zoom offline because it was not totally relevant here. So I will pass it off to one of my colleagues to close us out. Thank you, everybody. A recording of this will be made available. You have our email. I'm going to copy our email into the chat. And so please don't be a stranger if you have any questions.
Yeah, we're going to leave the recording up on the NCI Facebook page. So it'll be there for you. And even if they don't keep it there forever, we will also make it available and we'll give it a permanent home, just like we did with our similar video for Zoom last year. So this will be out there for you guys.
Yeah,
give
we
it
do
to
have
you.
our own Vimeo channel, Facebook page, and we are on LinkedIn. So feel free to like us, connect to us, and check out the other recordings that are there as well.
We have a YouTube too. We have one video on our YouTube, so that can be a New Year's resolution maybe to get some more stuff up on there.
Yep. So be in touch, and we will look forward to seeing you in a future presentation or to hearing from you or connecting with any of you who might have more questions after this presentation. So have a wonderful night, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks for coming.
And I may start kicking people out.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting here. Thank you so much. Have a great night.